All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Jen, thank you for being here today. Very excited.
For having
Of course. All right. Let's start with our peaches and pits. Angie, you want to go first?
Yeah. So my pit is that I just haven't really felt really great in my skin lately. I think it's just like my age, and I don't know. I'm just in like this little funk, but
Mm,
actively working to get out of it. But it's just one of those things where you're just like, meh. Everything about me is just meh. So
I can identify. I feel like I went through that recently.
yeah, maybe it's just 35.
Maybe. Yeah. I used some tanning lotion. That made me feel better.
Oh, okay. I'll have to try it. I'm always looking for tips. And then my peach is my husband and I are big Husker football fans, and we were able to go to the game this weekend, which was really fun, just the two of us. And we had some friends and family watching the kids, so that was fun just to spend time with him and see the Huskers win, because that also doesn't happen super often.
Sadly, yes. Accurate.
What about you?
Jen, what about you?
I would say my pit for this week is definitely that we have all gotten sick this week.
Oh,
We
no.
made it a couple weeks into school, and then we've all gotten a pretty bad cold. So that's
Oh,
my pit for the week. My peach is that we are surviving and slowly getting better. So
yes.
there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
That's the worst. Back to school, man. I
Yeah.
can piggyback off of that. My pit is that my kids got lice this weekend. So
Oh,
that was a super fun back to school treat.
yeah.
It's the
The gift
gift
that
that
keeps on giving.
I was just gonna say it's the gift that keeps on giving. Um, so after 4 days of laundry, I think today will be my last day. But my peach is that we did get to take a nice little break from lice extermination, and we went to the Applejack Festival this weekend, and it was just beautiful, like sunny 75 and sunny. It was just like a perfect day to be walking around like the orchard and hiking, and grandma and grandpa got to come with us, and we did like the treetop rope course, which is fun and hilarious to see my parents navigate. So, um, mostly because my dad is like a little kid on all of the rope bridges, and like he jumps and like makes them bounce everywhere. Meanwhile, my mom is just like clinging for dear life and like laughing so hard. So, despite having to spend our entire weekend sanitizing, we at least got to have a nice little break and, go do something fun.
Yeah.
I'll take that. So Spitfire shenanigans. Let's see. I think I've got this one today.
Hmm.
So it was this past winter. I had Nora and Caroline over playing, and they were playing house together, and Nora was the mom and Caroline was the teenage daughter who also was a teen mom. Which obviously I don't think they get. It was just that,
Right.
like, Caroline also, she was in high school, but she also had a baby. And their conversation, I'm like eavesdropping on their conversation in the living room as I'm making lunch. And Caroline's like, okay, Nora, I am going to ask you if you can watch my baby so I can go to my boyfriend's house. And Nora goes, okay, and I'm going to tell you no because I'm your mom and I don't want you kissing that boy. And Caroline goes, okay, I'm going to get mad at you and go to my room and still leave my baby and sneak out through the window to see him. And in my head, I was just like, dear God, help us for the day that they are actually teenagers.
Yeah.
So there's a lot you can unpack there. But
For
the
sure.
moral of the story was Caroline's going to sneak out and leave her baby unattended
To kiss boys.
to kiss boys.
Yeah.
So good luck with that.
So proud. Hashtag blessed. She's crazy.
Jen, do you have a story about the boys that you want to share?
I would say one thing that is just kind of delightful about their age is, especially Max. So he's 7 and in first grade. And he's still at the stage where he just thinks that there are all kinds of options available in life. And so, for instance, when he got his beginning of the school thing where they fill out, things like what their favorite color is and stuff like that. For what do you want to be when you grow up? He said he wants to be a Jedi. So that is his career ambition. And the fact that he thinks that is, an option that's open to him, I think is pretty delightful.
Yeah.
I love that. It reminds me of like the little star student posters that you always see like in the preschool and pre-K rooms where it's like,
Yep.
I want to be a mermaid, or Hudson's was a dinosaur catcher. He wanted to be a
dinosaur catcher. Okay.
Warren's is a motorcycle rider.
At least that is a legitimate.
Can you make money for just riding?
I guess you can't make money. It is an actual thing you can do, though.
Yes, that's true.
I guess if you're the leader of a motorcycle gang, you probably make money. I don't know how legal it is, but
yeah, I'd be 2 for 4 on gang leaders at that point. Then, so I'm not sure I'm willing to cultivate that dream.
I'm going to assume the other one's Caroline.
Yeah.
Obviously. All right. Well, I will kick off partner praise. We had doubleheader football games the other night on a school night, which is not normally how it happens. They were makeup games. And both the girls came early with me for practice, which meant by the time the games started, they were over it. And therefore, by the time Eric arrived shortly after the first game started, I was over it because they were both just like, they were just whining, and Nora wouldn't share, and that made Willa upset. And then like they both just needed a lot of attention. And he like distracted both of them enough, like played little games with them while we were sitting there watching, which put them in a better mood and gave me a second to regroup because I was about ready to lose my mind on them. So,
well, that's good.
Yeah. Yep. Delightful. Loved it.
Yeah. My partner praise is specific to this weekend, but also just like super generalized. I have a hard time sleeping just in general. I don't sleep well, and I really need sleep to not set off crabbiness and or my autoimmune stuff. And so this weekend we had 2 late nights in a row, Friday and Saturday night. And so Jesse just very specifically did not allow the children upstairs basically and let me sleep. But overall, he knows how important sleep is to my chronic health. And so I'm always allowed to sleep in on the weekends. And so it's nice
like
that he takes that one for the team.
Yeah, that's really nice. I like it. Jen, what about you?
I would say, well, my husband was the sickest out of all of us this week. But even though he was the sickest, he still would make sure that we were all feeling okay and doing okay and helping out as much as he could, even though he had a legitimate excuse to not. He still, valued the family. So just, I think seeing that is, I think, always
Yeah.
a good sign of commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree. It's a lot of work to help people when you're sick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, today we are joined by Jen, who, full disclosure, is my husband's cousin, which is how I know her. But Jen is an adjunct professor of healthcare ethics at Concordia University, Irvine, a freelance writer, and a mom of 2 boys. She has written about work, life, mental health, and parenting for the Washington Post, CNBC, Success Magazine, Psychology Today, and other outlets. So today we're going to be covering this topic of what holds women back, which, as I was kind of prepping this episode, almost felt like too big of a topic for one episode. It felt like you could have a whole podcast on what holds women back. But Jen is super knowledgeable through all of her work and study and writing that she's done. So she's going to help us unpack it. And I think we've got a really great conversation ready to go. So I want to kick things off with this idea. As we were prepping the episode, you brought up this idea, Jen, of deep work and this idea of greedy work, which they kind of compound and make things harder for moms. And it kind of like creates this umbrella for what holds us back. So can you kind of break down like what is deep work and what is this idea of greedy work, and how do they kind of come together to affect the mental load?
Yeah, so deep work is just the ability to deeply focus or concentrate on difficult tasks for a prolonged period of time without getting distracted. So deep work can obviously be very difficult to do if you are carrying a lot of the mental load. And that gets kind of exacerbated by this other issue of greedy work, which is one of the things that I think leads to the problem of the inequality that we often see with the mental load. So I think when it comes to the mental load, it can be easy to think of it as just kind of, a mom problem or a couple problem. I think as moms, it's easy to feel like we're struggling with the mental load because, of our own mental failings. And if we could just get more organized or find the right meal planning system or the right meditation app or self-care, we can just find something, then we'd be able to figure out how to deal with all the mental load. We'd be able to, get our lives organized, get things together. But it's never the case that we're just like one organizational shift away from being able to handle all of the mental load. It's not something we can organize our way out of or self-care our way out of. But it's also not just a couple's problem either. So it's not just that we can get dads to pitch in more, or the problem is that they don't care about equality or don't want to pitch in enough. Part of the problem is the way that work is structured, especially in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And that's what Claudia Golden, she's an economist at Harvard. She's the one who refers to this as the greedy work problem. So the problem is when we have work that's really demanding in terms of the number of hours required, or that you would have to be constantly available to your boss or to clients, um, which is has become even more so now that you can now that we're like always reachable. That becomes a bigger problem. Or if you have to travel a lot, it's hard to have both parents if you're partnered. It's hard to have both parents be doing that kind of um, time intensive, inflexible, those kinds of jobs. Because somebody needs to be able to stay home when the kids are sick and take them to their dentist appointments and all of their practices and help them with their homework and you know monitor their screen time and all of the things that go into modern parenting. It's hard to do that if both parents have jobs that make that stuff harder to balance.
Yeah.
So it's hard for both parents to balance these kinds of demanding and flexible jobs and family life. So you often get one parent who kind of downshifts their career, takes a career that's more flexible. This might be, one that requires fewer hours or is less stressful or has less travel, or just more flexible. Something that lets them leave in the afternoon to pick up their kids when they need to. And then that parent becomes the on call or the default parent. And historically, has been more likely to be moms. Moms have been the ones to kind of downshift their careers to become the on call parent. And I mean, it's possible for both parents to choose to downshift their careers, but the problem that Claudia Golan raises here is that this can actually, make them leave money on the table, because it's with greedy jobs. It's not just that you make more money because you work more hours. These jobs actually pay disproportionately more per hour. You make more per hour working a greedy job, and so the couple could maximize their household income by having one person work this kind of job and then one person working part-time or a more flexible job or not working, than they could if they both had more flexible, less demanding jobs. So this can be hard if college is expensive and childcare is expensive and houses in good school districts are expensive. So it can be really hard for couples to have to feel like they have to make this choice.
Yeah.
Between either trying to make it with two demanding jobs, which can often lead to burnout if you're trying to do both, or both downshift your careers, and then try to make everything work financially, or have one person take a greedy job and one person kind of downshifting their career.
Yeah. Well, and I think it like adds either way. I think it adds kind of a domino effect. Like if you both take that greedy job, like you just said, then financially, you're both going to you're going to have to end up paying for some of those other things that you just don't have the capacity to take on. Like you're going to need to find childcare that has maybe extended hours or something like that, which generally is more expensive and therefore is only accessible to people who, are in positions where they can climb the ladder and do those kinds of things. And then on the other side, or you're going to have to pay for like,
A
maybe somebody to
housekeeper.
transport, yeah, a housekeeper, or I don't
Yeah.
know if there's anybody out there with a private chef. That's that's my own personal aspirations, is somebody who plans
Yeah,
my meals
same.
and cooks healthy things for me and my family that taste delicious every single day.
And we'll
Um,
then do the dishes. Yes.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. You have to kind of pay for those additional services that you just don't have the capacity for. Or on the flip side, if you are downshifting, like economically, you're just not participating at the same level that you could be. That leaves less money in your budget to be able to say like, hey, you want to try dance and volleyball? That's great. We can afford to do both of those things and like afford our children the opportunities to explore things that interest them. And so I feel like it's sort of a lose-lose situation. You end up in a position where you're either paying for it, and even at a certain point, I think if you've both got greedy jobs, there's still like a limit on how much you can pay for. Like, unless you're really rolling in it, you're not necessarily able to be like, let me hire out a housekeeper and a nanny to chauffeur my kids around and, get meals prepped for me or whatever. Like, do those really ungodly expensive like meal kit things every single week. So there's still like a cap, I feel like, on how much you can outsource financially.
Yeah. And even how much you want to outsource.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're working a job that doesn't let you take time off to like go see, your kids dance recital and their soccer game and stuff, then like that's another sacrifice that you have to make if you take these kinds of jobs.
It definitely feels like you're trying to figure out the time and money balance and
Mm-hmm.
where am I okay with falling on that scale.
Yeah, exactly. It puts parents in a difficult situation of having to make that choice, um, and like both for the individuals, but then also for the couple. So even if you decide one person takes the greedy job, one person doesn't, well, who gets the greedy job? Who gets to be the on-call parent? Um, both of those choices might not be optimal, right? So dads tend to be the ones who are more likely to take the greedy jobs, but that doesn't mean that they're necessarily happy with having to make that choice either, because you have a lot of dads who are saying like, I wish I had more time to be able to spend with my family, and I don't like having to miss out on these things. But then, for moms who downshift their careers, it can have a big impact because it's not just that you are making less money now, it puts you on a different career trajectory, right? So the people who are able to put in more time and more travel and be available all kinds of hours, those are the ones who are more likely to get the big clients, to get the promotions and get the career awards, and um, all the kinds of things that can move you forward in your career. So even if you downshift temporarily, trying to get back in can be uh, can be difficult.
Mm-hmm. I feel like that trade-off is also why you're seeing so many, and I've seen a lot of articles about this recently on LinkedIn, where it's women who have made it into C-suite and high-level positions are now saying like, this wasn't worth the trade-off. Like, I am going to shift out of this work and into something, into more like freelance consulting type positions because I want that flexibility back. I want to be able to be present with my family versus feeling like I've got to be here for work and I have to be able to answer phone calls at any time of the day or anything, be at somebody else's beck and call versus my family who, obviously like I chose to have a family and they're probably more important to me than my job is. Or
it goes back to the work like you don't have a family and have a family like you don't work. Like
yeah.
you can't, it's impossible.
Yeah. It's, I totally lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
It's gone. I was trying to read and interact at the same time, which apparently I cannot do today. So let me take a second and I obviously won't edit this part out. We'll make a note at minute 25 to.
Well, it's the multitasking. Like the multitasking, this is exactly, what's killing moms is trying to do and juggle so many things at once. And when you have like all this stuff that you're trying to do, it can make it very hard to do deep work or anything that requires concentration or the ability to like work for a prolonged period of time without getting distracted. That can be really hard if you're trying to juggle other things or think about other things. And I think that's where these two things get connected, and why we get this cycle is when we have greedy work and when work is kind of set up in this way, such that one person often becomes the kind of on-call or default parent, and that gets shifted to one person, then it's not just that like that then takes time or physical availability for them to do all the extra parenting and household tasks, but it adds to the mental load, having to do all that extra stuff. And so that makes it harder to focus and harder to do deep work when you're trying to do all the multitasking, and when we have to think about all the things, and we are trying to remember all the things, or we're worrying about all the things because we're in charge of all the things. We feel guilty about all of the things. All of that goes through our minds when we're trying to sit down and get focused work done. So it's not just that we're getting distracted by external things, but it's like all the internal distractions that can make it hard to focus with the mental load.
Yeah, the mental load it really just like bleeds like in your brain to every aspect of your life, regardless if it's relevant or not to the task at hand.
Yeah. I felt like that this morning logging in. So like Friday, I discovered the lice, 5 minutes before we have to walk out the door. And I'm like, and Eric had already left. He had made plans to go hunting. Pause there for my dog to scratch himself very loudly. So Eric was already up and out of the house and, far enough away that it was like, what am I going to do? Call him back. And honestly, like it is what it is. I was like, there's no point. I'll just handle this right now. But, I was like, at first when it was just one kid, had like texted my boss and I was like, let me just, get the other two off to school. Let me get her like treated and situated. And then I should be able to like log on and work. And then I discovered it on the other two. And so now it's like, okay, well, I had some choice words to say about it. And I was like, great, now we're all home. And I was like, I got to remember to text Angie and let her know that Caroline probably shouldn't spend the night tomorrow night. And I need to go, and like immediately it was like, what are all the things that like, okay, I've got to do a Target run now to pick up the shampoo, but what else do I need? I probably need to pick up new pillows while we're there and all this, like stuff. And it continued through the entire weekend. And then this morning, Monday morning, I go to sit down and I was like, I can't even focus. I just feel so disorganized because my entire weekend was spent doing not any of the normal stuff I would do to like get me ready for the week. And so by the time I sat down at my computer this morning, I was like, I don't know where I'm at work wise. Like I need, I was like, I know I have like one thing I need to get my boss's approval on, but I'm not ready. I'm not prepared for our like one-on-one meeting, which I hate, going in and being like, I have no idea what I need to talk to you about today. And then I was like, in my head, I'm like, okay, I also want to make sure that I like circle back and I'm prepped for this interview over our lunch hour, but also like our house is just pure chaos still, like we had the benefit of getting a lot of laundry and stuff done, but I'm like, everything else is just, because everybody was home from school then on Friday. And so I couldn't even focus. I was like, I feel like I just need to take this week off simply just to reorganize my mind, both personally and professionally, to just put a list together and be like, okay, pause, restart. I had all of this great energy last week and it felt very focused. And I knew what I wanted to get done coming into this week for work, but now that's all like gone and I can't seem to find that train of thought. And then also just for this week to be like, where are we at? Like we've got an extra baseball clinic tonight that we weren't planning on having. And can I send Eric to that while I stay home and I get all of this stuff done? And like, that's like my own internal monologue. And then thankfully the kids are back today. Everybody was like deliced and free to go back to school. But I was like, the ability to tonight to even I'll have both the girls and it'll be a constant like mom, 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 mom. And I'll be like, what? I just I'll be like, here's the TV. This is your mother for the night. Like I can't have you talk to me because if I don't get this stuff done for my own sanity, tomorrow will be an equally unproductive day.
Yeah, I have found as I've gotten older that I really have to be like very intentional about making sure I have carved out time for that deep work that we talked about earlier as it relates to my own organization for professional and personal life. I feel like I have to be, because like it gets to a point where like you're just running on slippery oil and not doing anything and almost just making more work for yourself in the long run while you're trying to spin those wheels. Pausing for Otto to get his shit together. Thanks, Jess. But yeah, so unless you're taking that very intentional time to reset and restart, I feel like it's just chaos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And so much of the chaos is internal. And so, like, that's the invisible nature of it, I think, makes it even harder. So, worrying about this, everything you have to do and trying to remember everything you have to do is not visible to anybody else, but it's just going on in your head. And so Cal Newport, who is the one who's kind of famous for this notion of deep work, um, he had a really interesting exchange with Yael Schonbrun, who's the author of Work, Parent, Thrive, um, on this issue of why it can be so hard to do deep work when you're a parent, especially when you're a mom, and he was having a hard time kind of figuring out what the problem was, what the pain point was, because if deep work is supposed to just be when you have your available block of time, then you get rid of your distractions and you turn your phone on silent, you go check your email and all that stuff. And you might have, maybe moms have less time available, but he's like, during the time, then you should still be able to do the deep work. And so he was trying to figure out, what's the problem. Is it that kids are interrupting? Is it that you need to go somewhere and get a babysitter or something? And Yael brought up a really good point about how it's not just the external distractions that can get in the way of deep work, but it's the internal distractions. And when you bring those with you, when you bring, the feeling guilty about being at work instead of at home with your kids, or, this kind of perpetual awareness that you have to have. If you're the one who's in charge of monitoring all the things, then it's hard to sort of shut that off. And especially like those parts of the mental load that are, the less visible parts of the awareness and the planning and figuring out, the paying attention to what's going on and figuring out what needs to be done. That's something that's like ongoing.
Yep.
So since it's ongoing, it's hard to shut it off, and to disconnect. So you feel like, it's like hypervigilance. It's like constant hypervigilance.
Yeah.
When you have all that stuff.
And what I have found is that it takes an extraordinary amount of prep work to get to the point where I'm like, okay, I've got this time, so if I say, tonight, for example, like Angie and I, for example, typically record this podcast in the evenings. It takes a ton of work to get everybody prepped into the point where I can go, all right, I'm going downstairs to record now, and, or if I wasn't, going to do something, like obviously to record and things like that, like our house has to be quiet. We can't, have a ton of chaos happening. But even if I was like, okay, I want to be able to, work on putting like the furniture together, like our sunroom is done and we want to start kind of putting that together. So I've got to think through like all the things that I want to do or that have to get done so that I can go and be like, all right, I'm going to be in here relatively uninterrupted for the next couple of hours to kind of work on it. But I think there's also the flip side. I feel like the examples that I've been using are all very tangible stuff, but also there's times that I just want to do like deep work on my own creative passions. And that is not necessarily, not everybody understands like, oh, mom wants to sit down and paint. They're like, oh, that's fun. Can I paint with you? Or like if I were to say, okay, well, I want to sit down and I want to be able to, do some research or work on some of our content or something like this. It's not that is not something that benefits like our whole household. It is really, truly just something that's mine. And, there's an extraordinary amount of work that goes into getting everybody to the point where it's like, okay, so you all are situated now, right? I could go sit down and take 30 minutes to research this podcast episode if I wanted to. And
Yeah,
no one's going to come to me and be like, but what about, like I'm hungry for the 14th time since I served a dinner that everyone refused, like
that's for
I,
sure where I struggle with most is that like when it doesn't benefit the family as a whole or more than just me, like I know that I have a really hard time making space and doing the deep work for that in particular.
yeah. So I think that's a really great segue into this like next question, which is obviously as a society, we're not really set up for men or women, right, to kind of support modern families. So, what is it like on a societal level? What can we be doing to kind of help change this? But then I think more importantly, what can we do? Like the societal shift is a long term thing, but there has to also be something I feel like that we can do in the meantime that's like, oh, this gives me some immediate sense of relief from it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think at the societal level, I mean, we definitely have to make work life more tenable for parents, without just making mommy track jobs, because we don't want it to. Because I mean, that just kind of exacerbates the whole um, gender equality and couple equality problem. You know, even if you have some people who are then more able to be the on-call parent, if it's not both parents being able to share at least somewhat equally in both work and parenting, or parenting and whatever else they want to be doing, then we still end up kind of where we're at with the one person ends up with a lot of the mental load. But I think one way to start addressing the problem is to just make work less greedy. Have more jobs that are more flexible and that pay decently. So, get rid of this. Either you can have a well-paying job, or you can have a flexible job, but you can't have both. Well, why can't we make jobs that are more flexible that still pay decently? I mean, it actually has happened in some fields. So Cletty Golden talks about, in pharmacy, in veterinary medicine, it used to be the case that you had greedy jobs, and you had, pharmacists who owned, owned their own pharmacy, and then you had, one person who was in charge, but then had to be on call and work longer hours. Whereas now, it's the workers are much more substitutable, which is in a way a good thing, because then it's a lot easier to, when one person has to be gone for something, it's a lot easier for somebody else to come and step in, right? So now when you have to fill hours for a pharmacy, it's a lot easier to, to rearrange and to kind of share the workload. And like now that we have, emergency animal hospitals, right? Then you don't have all the veterinarians having to be on call all the time. If you have an emergency off hours with your pet, then you just take them to um, to the animal hospital rather than having to call your vet and wake them up. And when they had these shifts in these fields, then they started getting a lot more gender equality in terms of the pay gaps between men and women working in these fields really started to shrink when they moved away from having these greedy jobs versus where either you have the greedy job or the less greedy assistant job that doesn't pay well, right? When you lessen that gap, then you can reduce that, the motherhood wage gap. So if we can do this more in other fields, which hopefully now that a lot more companies have with more flexible and outlook sort of thing.
One sec, hold on. Something happened and the audio. Angie, do you hear like the
clicking?
Yeah. What happened there? Okay.
Am I clicking?
Yeah, it was, but it just started like in the middle
Of your sentence.
So I think it's good now. So if you want to start that like last thought over, then you should be good.
Okay, so it's not still clicking. Okay.
No.
Sometimes my AirPods will just die on me.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Okay.
So you're talking about the vets in the less greedy positions.
Yeah. So when pharmacies and veterinary medicine, when it started moving away from this kind of dichotomy of having the greedy jobs where the owners worked a lot of hours and had to be on call a lot, and then they had the assistants who didn't have to work as much, but then didn't get paid nearly as well. When they kind of went away from having those two very distinct positions and moved more towards having less greedy jobs where people had now pharmacists have much more regular hours, then that the gender pay gap really started to shrink in those fields, especially compared to other fields that didn't get away from the greedy jobs. And so it does seem to be some potential hope for reducing the gender wage gap and also for increasing the flexibility.
Well, and it seems like something that, sorry, go ahead. It seems like something that you could like do kind of universally across the board. Like as you're kind of citing these examples, I think about like restaurants and retail and things like that. Like you can kind of be in those manager positions, which are generally like more demanding. They're not flexible. You are on call all the time and you have to be able to like jump in at a moment's notice and like take a shift and cover and things like that. Or you can be, you can be in the more flexible position where you're like, yeah, I can call in sick today. Somebody else is going to figure it out, i.e. my manager. and it seems like this idea of kind of equalizing those things, and by adding in more flexibility, it benefits all of the people across the board. And then not only that, but the people then who maybe previously were like, I could not, even if I wanted to be in that managerial position, it just isn't something that I can do. Maybe I'm a single mom and I can't have, like, I don't have somebody who, if I've got a shift, I can't say to my partner, hey, I need you to take my kid right now. Like, you need to stay home today because I have a shift and I absolutely can't miss it. It equalizes that. And it's like, well, if I know that there's flexibility and there's maybe a larger pool of people who can, of other managers who could maybe step in, or, we can kind of cover trade. It seems like there's the opportunity to get really flexible instead of thinking of just sort of this like tit for tat kind of system where it's like, well, if I'm going to cover your shift at the last minute, then I'm going to need you to cover my shift coming up. It seems like there's opportunity to be creative in how you kind of cover those things. And by widening the pool, it just creates more opportunity across the board when everything is more flexible.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it doesn't even have to come at a cost to businesses, right? When you give workers more flexibility and more autonomy, that generally makes them happier and oftentimes more productive workers. And I mean, that's something that we've kind of seen from over the last few years, especially, is that, some remote work can help people be more productive. And it's not just parents who benefit from this, right? Because it's not just parents who have responsibilities in life and have things that they want to do in life. It's definitely something that can, having more flexibility, being able to take time off when you're sick or, when a loved one get sick or, that kind of thing. Or even just to take time off to do something that you really want to do.
Yeah, enjoy life.
The day. And then, yes, and then be able to, do your work later. Seems to benefit a lot of people without huge dings to productivity, if not, adding certain flexibility and autonomy seems to actually make people more productive, right? So trying to figure out exactly what the right structure is in terms of, how much flexibility is necessary for parents to be able to work, and for how much flexibility works for companies, and figuring out the logistics is something that'll take time, but there are definitely changes that can be made in terms of making jobs more flexible for everybody, and not having to make everybody pay for that flexibility takes away this having to make the choice between jobs that help you support your family and jobs that help you be there for your family, right? Mm-hmm. So it would allow for, a lot more couples to have more equality when it comes to work and parenting.
Yeah, 100%. I was just thinking as you were saying this and kind of reflecting back on, I think when we started this podcast, I feel like we sort of really had a focus on like women, and it was like, how do we lighten the mental load for women? And I think by and large that still is it, but what I find us talking about more often than not is just how structures don't really benefit either parent. But we don't talk about as much how it impacts men in relationships or in modern families. I think primarily because we kind of look at it as like, well, you've got kind of the upper hand right now, like you are, you're in the higher paying jobs, you are in all, you've got kind of the autonomy, or you can move a little bit agnostically to the family unit than like a mother would. And I think that's kind of that is sort of the issue. But as you were talking, it really just kind of like sunk in where I was like, man, this is something that there is just as much at stake for men and equally as much changes that have to happen for men as there are for women in this. And so as we think about these things, and I agree, I feel like there's a lot of hope for what we can do on a societal level. I think it's coming along very slowly. I think there are some things I am seeing a lot of pushback to like the return to office and things that are like that kind of movement where everybody's like, all right, we had our like remote flexibility work from home moment. Like that was cute, but now we're going to need you to come back. And I see a lot of people, both women and men, who are kind of fighting back and saying like, that's not actually the most, like, no, I don't want to go back to that. Actually, this benefits my life balance a lot better than like the system that we used to have in place. But I also feel like sometimes it is painstakingly slow. And I am often kind of left wondering, like, if I don't have the option to, if I don't work for a company that is on board and is actively, working towards this, like what can I do today? How do I find time to do deep work if I am not in a position where that's afforded to me, right? It's not given to me right now. Where do I go and like how do I make space and kind of whether I want to fulfill my own purpose or whether I just truly need like an hour to get whatever work done without being interrupted, because it's not like something I can just like self-care my way out of. This isn't something that like a cup of coffee and a face mask is going to fix for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so I think a big part of it is figuring out how to deal with all of the internal distractions. I think is going to be a huge part of it. So I think first we have to acknowledge the guilt that we feel, because that can be a huge thing that can really make it hard to do deep work and to be able to focus and concentrate. That I think moms in particular often suffer from is when you feel like your family needs you and you're in charge of all this stuff. It can be really easy to feel guilty when you're doing anything other than that. And so, I mean, part of it is like the ongoing nature of the mental load. So there's always problems to be solved. And when we feel like, oh, we haven't solved all of our family's problems yet, then we can't move on to something else. So I think the first thing is to like figure out how to get unstuck from that. I think because that can be an easy place to get stuck and to have a hard time even like moving forward and getting into deep work. So I think like just being able to recognize, well, we are never going to solve all of our family's problems. So like, it's always going to be a game of whack-a-mole where you get one thing handled and then something else comes up. And it's kind of just part of being a human living in the world with other humans. So if we waited to like solve all of our family's problems before we allowed ourselves to do anything else, then we would never really do anything else. So allowing ourselves to actually take that time to do deep work, whether it's for our careers or for ourselves, and I think that can be an even harder thing to do, to let yourself do deep work, creative work, take time to, paint or, play the piano and, things like that can be almost even harder to get ourselves to be okay with doing when it's not something that is, immediately beneficial to the family or necessary for work. So I think kind of acknowledging the guilt that can come with that and, recognizing that we're never going to, feel like we have everything else all in order. And so now we are allowed to do to do something that is fulfilling, or, restorative for ourselves. So I think that's kind of an important first step. And then we have to figure out how to deal with all the mental distraction. So doing a brain dump, I think is a really important step. Just getting your thoughts and your worries out of your head, allowing yourself to address them later, right? Mm-hmm. So when we can actually write them down or put them in a list, or put them on the calendar, that helps our brain to recognize that we intend to do these things later, which helps us to be able to focus on other things. So doing a brain dump is another kind of key part to being able to focus and do deep work. And protecting our time is the other sort of big thing. Right? So it can be hard to put a box around, all of our family stuff or our worries and our concerns about our kids and try to contain it all in a box. But we can sometimes think of having, whatever time for deep work we have and putting a small box around that. So putting a box around this, whatever my small amount of time is, to do this work or this, creative activity. So for the next 30 minutes, then, I am going to protect this time to, to do whatever. I think it's important, both protecting it from external distractions, but also protecting it from internal distractions.
I like the idea. I like that idea of kind of flip-flopping it instead of trying to put the box around all of your family stuff, is just putting it around this hour that I have in between work and going to pick up the kids is my time to do whatever. And I think I have actually been kind of experimenting with this and saying okay, I get done with work at this time and I go and I get the kids at this time. And so on the days that a couple of those days, it's a gym day. But then on the days that I'm not going to the gym, I used to be okay, well, I'm just going to go get the kids early then. And then I've kind of flipped it a little bit and I've been okay, well, I've got this hour that I was, on another day I go to the gym, but today I'm going to use it and I'm going to work on whatever it is. And I've kind of given myself that permission to be this is going to be the hour that I spend here. So if I'm going to spend it, then let's do something with it. I don't, I don't want to get done and be oh, I spent an hour where I thought I was going to work on podcast stuff. But in all actuality, I felt guilty that I wasn't going to the gym or picking up the kids or cleaning my house. So then I just scrolled through Facebook instead.
Have you been spying on me?
It's true. I'll just short circuit and be like, oh, I can't do
Yeah.
anything, so I guess I'll just sit here and scroll.
Yeah. It's mental load paralysis. It's a
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's I I think those are really great steps to be able to take. I think it is kind of easier said than done sometimes to be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna like let go of feeling guilty about this or like trying to put time constraints around, problem solving. And one of the things that I've tried to do when I do kind of give myself the freedom to do something instead of feeling guilty about it is trying to look at it as like, how much happier am I going to be after, if I spend an hour doing something that is really just truly enjoyable to me, to me personally, it is my own thing, then I find that like I am just generally a better and happier person when I show up better for my kids when I'm like, ooh, I feel really lit up and excited about this thing versus, yeah, I spent that free hour cleaning and that's great, but nobody here appreciates that except me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like that's one of the more, I don't know, unfortunate things about um, having an imbalance in the mental load and having the mental load be such a drain on deep work and being able to concentrate and focus is that it's not just that it makes it harder to, get work done and advance in your career and that sort of thing. It makes it harder to do anything that is meaningful, that requires focus, concentration. And so, like, we not only lose out on, the work and, um, things um, that could move us forward, but we also lose out on, um, things that are important for our identity and important for, being a person and being creative and having, um, things that are meaningful and
Mm-hmm.
fulfilling, um, and being able to have time for that, not just
Yeah.
time for that, but the ability to focus on
Yeah.
those things, I think is really important and needs to be something that both moms and dads are able to share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think having an equilibrium where we're both free to kind of pursue those things is really, I mean, that is the goal of all of this, right? That would be the goal of companies recognizing that they need to make work more tenable for both men and for women. It would be the goal of for us as women being able to look at it and say like, okay, I'm going to let go of this guilt. I'm going to, maybe reframe the idea of like, I'm going to put this boundary in place, but I'm going to put it around my personal pursuit or whatever it is that I'm, this period of time kind of thing. It creates this more equilibrium where then like ultimately you do end up shifting some of those things around because it's a necessity, right? But nobody looks at it as like, oh, now I have to take on something that I wasn't before. It just sort of becomes this natural state where everybody realizes that they benefit from it instead of feeling like, oh, we've got to maintain what we've got now because one group has it really good and the other group is sort of, you know, struggling under the weight of all of these expectations and responsibilities.
Yeah. Well, the expectations part is important too because that makes the mental load harder and more taxing for women when we have that added social expectation that
Mm-hmm.
we're the ones in charge of all this stuff. And so we're the ones who feel like if this stuff doesn't get done, then we'll be judged and we'll be blamed for it.
Mm-hmm.
Not our husbands. And so that added pressure makes it even harder and, more stressful. And when men actually take on more of the mental load, it's researchers have found that it is not as it does not increase their anxiety or depression as much as it does for moms, when moms have a higher share of the mental load. And they think that it is partly because of the expectations, right? When you take on more of the mental load, but you're not necessarily expected to, like there's not this social expectation that you'll do so, then you don't feel this pressure of responsibility and like social judgment if you get it wrong, and you get rewarded for doing it and for getting things right. And so it's kind of a win-win. And so it also makes it makes moms happier when we have less of the mental load. So that's obviously also going to be beneficial too in terms of the partnership and how we view our partners. So it's not that men taking on more of the mental load is even going to be necessarily as taxing for them as maybe it is for us. So there's definitely, I think, room for improvement without a ton of sacrifice. So I think there's some hope there.
I'm smiling because Angie, I feel like we answered our question from last week. So we in our episode from last week, one of the questions that we kind of ended on that, or we started with it, but we circled back at the end and we were like, I don't know if we've really answered this, was essentially because our first episode of this season was kind of about the patriarchy and sort of like how that societal structure kind of conditions men in a way that doesn't benefit them for participating in modern family life. And the question that we were not sure we answered at the end was, well, would men ever give up what essentially is like an ace in the hole? Because right now, like the way work is set up, the way economics is set up, the way everything is set up really kind of benefits them. And I'm smiling because I feel like, you said they can take on more without like the stress and things like that and the anxiety that women get, and they'll be rewarded for it, which we've also talked about how dads tend to get patted on the back for doing things that moms do every single day that nobody is like, oh, that makes you such a great mom.
Right.
So I love that because now I feel like we've answered our question. I think, yes, men could give up the ace in the hole because really what's probably going to happen is they're going to get tons of recognition and everybody's going to be like, oh my God, you're amazing. And you know what's probably going to happen too? We're going to pay them for it. We're going to be like, you do so much great work, like we should pay you for going to the grocery store and doing all of that meal prepping. Like, kudos to you, Dad.
Right. Oh, boy.
That part probably won't happen, but I would also laugh if in some like ironic twist we were like, oh my God, dads do all of this extra work. They should be compensated for it. Like they should get tax refunds for this.
It's a tax write-off every time you go to
It's
the
a tax
grocery store.
write-off. Yeah, I could
You're
have been
like,
rich by now.
I gave kid one a bath. I gave kid two a bath.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for how we value things in society. and then how people respond to those values. Like when things are not valued, then people don't want to do them as much. But if we can maybe shift how we value things and also shift who does them, then maybe that can also then further shift how we value them.
Love it. Well, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time and being here, and it's great to see you. I'll see you, Angie. I'll see you soon, I guess. Thursday night.
Thursday night. No, tomorrow. Volleyball.
Oh, I meant for podcast recording, but yes, I will see you tomorrow night for volleyball. And I'll see you Thursday night for dance.
Yep. All right. We'll see you later.
All right. Thanks, Jen.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.